I started writing this poem when the umbilical cord was cut, even though I should know better, and it was never close enough to you. I started writing this poem when I scratched, when I had the chicken pox. I started writing this poem when I took the final swig of vodka and reached for the bottle to pour myself another. I started writing this poem when I found myself trying to make excuses. I started writing this poem when I wiped the makeup off my eyelids and wondered who I was trying to impress. I started writing this poem when I met you, the man who rapes my sisters. You, the man who rapes me. I started writing this poem when I pulled out a fountain pen and wrote till my fountain pen ran dry. I started writing this poem when the Pope gave a thank you to women who work, because we do more than our fair share without fair pay, and we prove ourselves to who over and over again. I started writing this poem when I belched out loud and laughed too hard, swore too much, and grew up too fast. I started writing this poem when I felt that feeling in my chest, right between my lungs, like someone was pressing right against the bone there, right there by your heart. I started writing this poem when I looked at the clock. It was 15 minutes before I had to take another pill. I started writing this poem when I realized that nothing changes, nothing stays the same. I started writing this poem when you took my thoughts again, shoved them into your mouth again, and spit them back at me again. And you told me what I already know. I started writing this poem when you rolled your sultry, deep voice over me like a wave of heat on a summer afternoon. I started writing this poem when I felt that breeze, hot and sticky, hit me in just the wrong way. I started writing this poem when you needed a leader, so I stepped up to the plate. I started writing this poem when I knew who they were coming for. I started writing this poem when I threw out into the open my screams, my cries for help so much faster than I could before. I started writing this poem when he said, when somebody eats one of you, word gets around. I started writing this poem when I found a method of fighting more direct, slower, more painful, more personal. I started writing this poem when I realized that somebody had to die for these. I started writing this poem when the cuts into my hands dripped blood onto the street. I started writing this poem when I'd walked down that street in the city again and it looked like a Quentin Tarantino movie where everybody's pointing guns at each other. I started writing this poem when, after years of putting the 9mm on the line, of knowing that the base of the neck was always the best place, my only thought was, aim carefully. I started writing this poem when the only choice we had was to destroy ourselves. I started writing this poem when I drizzled cream into my coffee, watching it form a mushroom cloud within that contained bomb, when you just died. I started writing this poem when you took me down into that casket with you, where I felt the coldness of winter all around me and I could hear them shoveling the dirt over my head. I started writing this poem when I survived the blizzards, the hurricanes, the tornadoes. I lived through the drought. I'd survived it all. I've even survived a near fatal blow from humanity. I started writing this poem when Dachau's gas chambers worked every morning as snow fell on ashes. I started writing this poem when my mother died. That's when the forest fire started and the whole forest burned down. But I started writing this poem when I had to get closer. Because I started writing this poem when the universe was always expanding. I needed to write to fill in the ever-expanding spaces. I started writing this poem when all I could do was turn my fingers black, scouring the newspaper, searching for the right words. I started writing this poem when I wasn't occupying Wall Street. I just wanted to occupy your mind. You see, I started writing this poem when slamming my hands, my fingers against that keyboard. I was doing this because there were too many atrocities in the world, too many injustices that I had witnessed, too many people who had wronged me, and I had a lot of work to do. I started writing this poem when there was a spirituality behind it. It is something I do because I must, and I could not exist any other way.